Welcome back to The Point. Hope you're all doing well on this Wednesday. The MLB trade deadline has come and gone, and rosters are set for the final 2 month stretch of the season. A flurry of late moves yesterday. We're going to talk about them all. Today, a few things I got right, a few things I got wrong. We'll dive into the action last night in the MLB world as well. We got a few NHL signings, arbitration cases have been settled. A number of signings in Boston. Edmonton signed Ryan McLeod last night, so that is now done. So we'll talk about that. There's a UFC fight that was supposed to happen September 16th. That is now off due to an injury. And a huge weekend coming up for Justin Thomas on the PGA Tour. It's the Wyndham Championship. It's not a huge event. It's the weekend before the PGA playoffs start, the 3-week playoffs. The top 70 players of the season get to compete. As of right now, Justin Thomas is not included in that group. He needs a good weekend to make it, and we'll talk about his season and what's at stake for him this weekend, including possibly the Ryder Cup. But let's start with baseball. A lot of moves. Just right off the top, I think if you're baseball, you're very happy with your trade deadline. I would not be interested if I'm Major League Baseball as just an overall sport. I do not want to bring back the waiver deadline. I understand that owners, general managers, presidents, the higher-ups, if you will, likely don't want the trade deadline 2 months before the season's over. I think they would like it maybe August 15th, maybe August 20th. If we think about the NHL, the trade deadline is normally around February 28th, March 1st. That leaves about 40 days until the end of the regular season, meaning you got less than 2 months to decide your team, and you basically know where you are. 2 months left of baseball. Some teams have 60 games. There's a lot to be decided. There's a lot of series. A lot can happen in 2 months. So I understand, because I heard I was on a podcast I was listening to. Buster Olney was talking about why owners want to push it back. They want it farther. They don't want it so soon because they want to have more of an idea of where they are and who they are. If the trade deadline was August 15th, which I believe is 2 weeks, was 2 weeks from yesterday. If that was the date, the Cubs would be in a very different position. Maybe they keep winning, but they'd know. The Padres would be 2 weeks ahead. They would be in a different position than they are currently. The Reds, these teams that are all kind of bottled up, all kind of in the same position, they would know where they are, what's happening, and where they kind of want to go with this season. Everybody's kind of in the lurch. Everybody's in the same position. And that's why if I'm Major League Baseball, I'm not moving it. To me, they had a lot of interest. Yes, it's August, and there isn't a whole lot going on. Eric Carlson hasn't been traded. Sure, there's the NFL training camps, and that's always interesting. There's always something happening in the NFL. And, there's rumors, there's injuries. Calvin Ridley got hurt at practice today with the Jaguars. So there's stuff happening. But you had this trade deadline before an NFL preseason game. Check. Before Damian Lillard. Anything happened with Damian Lillard in the NBA? Check. It was not during a time where Lionel Messi was playing for Inter Miami and he was taking over the sports calendar? Check. So, all in all, a pretty successful last couple days from Major League Baseball. Rob Manfred recently signed a 4-year extension. That might have went a little bit under the radar. But you had the trade deadline. There isn't anything happening. The Jake Paul, Nate Diaz fight is this Saturday. So you picked a day. It's August 1st. People can remember that. I feel it went well for Major League Baseball. I feel it was a success, and it was an overall last couple weeks, a lot of activity, a lot of trades, and more teams were in it to win it, to make the playoffs, to not hang around the edges, and that's a positive thing too. Because there's a lot of bad teams in Major League Baseball. This year, there's less. Sure, the Athletics stink, and the Kansas City Royals are pathetic. And you look at those, the Pirates aren't very good. But the Cubs, who we didn't expect to be very good, are still in a playoff hunt, still in a divisional race. The Cincinnati Reds are in first place in the National League Central. The Los Angeles Angels of Anaheim are competing in their division, let alone the wild card race. So there are a number of good stories. There's a lot of competitive things happening in the sport. We talked yesterday. The Texas Rangers went out and got Max Scherzer, and they got Jordan Montgomery, and they got bullpen help with Chapman and with Chris Stratton. And they were saying, we're all in, we're trying to win a World Series. And there are moves that signal we're going to try, we're adding depth. We're making a move that's going to cost us little money for little prospects, but hopefully we can be the 03 Marlins, get hot, and go win a World Series. Or, honestly, we can be the 2016 Cubs, catch fire, and win that year. That can be our season. The Houston Astros are in a different set of circumstances. They are always competitive. They are in one of the toughest divisions in baseball. And they have to compete with said Texas Rangers and the Los Angeles Angels of Anaheim at the same time. And after winning a World Series last year, winning one in 2017 and being in 3 of the last 4 World Series themselves, they're in a position where it's in it to win it every year. Always. And yesterday, they got back one of their own when they acquired Justin Verlander. Verlander was traded from the New York Mets back to the Houston Astros for the number 1 prospect in the Houston system, Drew Gilbert, and oddly enough, Ryan Gilbert. 2 Gilberts heading back, no relation, to the Mets. Gilbert looks like a promising guy. He's batting over 300 in Double-A. Listening to the coverage yesterday on the Mothership, it sounded like he could be a major leaguer next year, so he could be playing for the Mets in 2024. But not just Verlander is back to the Astros. The Mets are going to pay $54 million of the remaining salary for Verlander, and that's added on from next year because he makes $43 million a season. So almost all of next year's salary and a chunk of this year's, the Mets are paying. They're also paying $23 million to Scherzer when he's in Texas. This is huge for Houston because they needed another starting pitcher. They now have Verlander, Framber Valdez, who, if you missed this, threw a no-hitter last night against the Cleveland Guardians. First lefty to ever throw a no-hitter in Astros history. Christian Javier, who's pitched in big games. Jose Urquidy, Brandon Bielak, JP France, who's a rookie who's pitched really well. The Astros now have pitching depth. They have options. And the great thing for Jim Crane, who's been running the Astros really well for a long time, he let Justin Verlander walk to the Mets in free agency because he was unwilling to pay the price that the Mets were willing to pay. And yet, this was in November, maybe December, this was signed. 7 months later, 6 months later, He's back in a Houston Astros uniform, and you're paying less than you ever would have been. You're letting the Mets pay for a guy that's not on their team. And you get to take him and hope he pitches well in the postseason and you win another World Series because your team is set up to do it again. It's one organization that was playing chess and another organization, the Mets, that are playing checkers. They signed 2 pitchers over 40 for big money and surrounded those pitchers with lackluster position players. They gave Brandon Nimmo an 8-year deal for crazy money. He's not having the same year. Jeff McNeil was the National League batting champion last year. He's batting .240 on the season. The Mets were flawed from the beginning. They were in desperation mode trying to sign Carlos Correa, who couldn't pass a physical to save his life. Thankfully, they don't have him on the books. But you knew it wasn't going to work, the Mets. Just like I knew the Yankees weren't going to work. I knew the Yankees weren't going to be a good team. And I've proven to be right. I'm not right on everything, but I'm right on that front. What I will say on the Mets' behalf that I will give them credit for. Organizations that double down on mistakes, that double down on just doing something for spite or doing something to try to show people that you're not wrong, are the ultimate just idiots. The Dallas Cowboys have majored in this for years. Signing players because we like the guy so much. He fits into our culture. He's a cowboy. Blah, 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 blah. Giving Ezekiel Elliott big money. You could go through the years of the Cowboys, giving Des Bryant the extra contract. I mean, it's letting Jerry Jones be a GM. I mean, there's a lot of... the Cowboys are easy pickings when it comes to picking out stupid things that they do on a daily basis. But the Mets, I give them credit for this. They're paying Scherzer and they're paying Verlander not to pitch for them. That's never a win. Certainly. That hurts. Steve Cohen, he's got a lot of money. And that's not good. But they know that they're not a good team. And clearly, Steve Cohen or the baseball people in New York have accepted their fate. They've accepted that we're not a good baseball team. The way we constructed this roster was wrong, and we need to do something different. And by trading these players, by paying the majority of their salaries next year, the Mets are already signaling to their fan base, we are not going to be good in 2024. We are not going to be a World Series team. We won't be spending in the offseason like we just did. Because our roster, our pipeline needs to be insulated with better prospects. We need to draft better. We need to get some prospects. At least they know where they are. The next big shoe to drop, after this year, Pete Alonso has 1 year left of control. He'll go through arbitration this winter, and after 2024, he will be a free agent. His average is barely above 200. He still hits home runs, but he's getting worse season over season. I talked about this last week. His average goes down every year. He's injured more and more. I'm not saying he's not a good player, but he isn't as good as he once was. So I would trade him. I would trade him in the winter to a team that is willing to pay him. That looks at him and says, okay, we're going to give him 10 years, $300 million. Just might not be that much, might not be that many years. But it's baseball, so probably will be. Let's just go in that number. 10 years, $300 million. We don't want to give him that contract because we don't think it's money well spent. I don't think it's money well spent, personally. I don't think he's worth that money. I don't think he's that good of a player. So all he does is hit home runs. But he doesn't drive any other runs in because he doesn't hit doubles, doesn't hit singles. It's only going over the wall for the Mets. Verlander's gone, Scherzer, Alonso. I doubt anybody takes Brandon Nimmo because they have 7 years after this one. Ugh. But you're eliminating a lot of the big contracts on your roster. Carrasco is done after the season. Jose Quintana was only on a 1-year contract. So you won't have any starting pitching going into next year other than Senga, who's good, who you're happy that you have. He's been a pretty decent starter since coming over from Japan, and this is his first year in North America. Also, you're getting rid of this money. They could still take a run at Shohei Ohtani. You might not be good in year one, but if Ohtani's on the Mets, do other players want to come play for the Metropolitans? Because Steve Cohen will spend big money and you have the best player in Major League Baseball history on your roster? Maybe. Better chance with Ohtani than any other player, certainly. So the Mets were stupid in November, December. They made mistakes. And sometimes teams just don't click. You have a collection of talent and it doesn't work. I think of what year was this? Might have been the 08. No, it was before that. It was a Colorado Avalanche way back when. They signed Timo Solani and Paul Correa. They had a great team. On paper, the team was loaded. It just never was that good. It didn't work. They didn't win a Stanley Cup. Solani was looking for one. Correa was looking for one. There was injuries. Things happened. And the team just didn't work. But I thought it was not bad signings at the time because the roster looked loaded. This Mets team just was never a great construction. Your two highest paid players are two of the oldest players in the league. Don't love that. You're giving big money to a center fielder who not that many teams wanted in free agency, and you coughed up big dough. You gave a big chunk of change to Francisco Lindor. Were you smart for signing him, or were the Guardians smart for letting him leave? I'm going to go with the Guardians on that front, but maybe I'm wrong about that. Anybody wants to have that debate with me? Sure, we can. Let's chat. It'll be quick, but I'll let you have your have your shot at me, if you will. But I applaud Houston for getting a player that they know and trying to win a World Series because they're in that position. And Texas is very good. They're very good. And I like their pitching staff. I like their position players. Their bullpen is much improved. They've done nothing wrong, the Texas Rangers. It took them a while for their money that they spent to work, but it is starting to work. It's like a stock. It doesn't always pay off right away. It takes some time. Their stock is rising and it's starting to pay off. But I still look at the Houston Astros in the American League, and to me, they're the best team. Because Jordan Alvarez is back. Jose Altuve is back. Alex Bregman. Jeremy Pena, the reigning World Series MVP. Verlander. Valdez. Stanek. Ryan Presley. A bullpen that has deep ties to knowing how to win. It's anybody's game in the Major League Baseball playoffs. And winning the American League West is extremely important for both teams because it will likely result in you getting a bye. You won't have to play in a wild card series. You get that rest. Your starting pitchers get some time off, which would help Verlander and Scherzer. Oddly enough, their teammates now they're in the same division, battling for a playoff position on their respective teams. These teams are only separated by half a game in the standings. It's going to be a dogfight down the stretch. But I look at the way, to me, Valdez is the best pitcher on either team. He's better than Verlander and he's better than Scherzer now. Evaldi's really good when he's healthy, but that's a big question mark. But on his game, when he's dialed in, Framber Valdez, who threw a no-hitter last night, is the best pitcher, you could argue. He's right up there with McClanahan. He's right up there with Garrett Cole in the American League for the best pitchers. He's just consistent. He gives you 6 innings every start. He's calm, cool, collected, and he just delivers. I'll take Valdez over Gausman. I'll take Valdez over Joe Ryan or Sonny Gray in Minnesota. Again, I'll take him because I've seen him do it in a World Series in the postseason. He doesn't wilt. I think you can look at both items here and say it's good business. The Mets had to trade Verlander. They found he wanted to go back to Houston. They made the trade work, and they got a good prospect. And they now set themselves up to spend, I wouldn't say they should spend money this offseason, but maybe the offseason of 2024 to get some young pieces and to build up a viable team that could actually win. A team that's built on skill, on viability, not one that's built on desperation and just a lack of feel of what it takes to win, which is what Steve Cohen and the Mets did. And they might have a new president of baseball operations come the start of next year. Decent chance of that. Texas also acquired Austin Hedges yesterday as a catcher from the Pittsburgh Pirates, so they get some depth at the catcher position, but I thought both teams did well during the trade deadline, and both teams are right up there with the best in the American League. So, good on both clubs. Let's pivot to the Blue Jays. It was an active, I think if you ask most Blue Jays fans, they would say it wasn't a very active trade deadline period, but honestly it was. They acquired 2 bullpen arms in Genesis Cabrera and Jordan Hicks, and they acquired Paul Dejong, a shortstop from, oddly enough, the St. Louis Cardinals. They made 3 trades with the St. Louis Cardinals, so they make 3 moves during the trade deadline period. But it feels a little underwhelming. It feels a little quiet, and the reason it feels quiet is because the team's not playing that good right now. It's because the starting pitching has been questionable. The bats are completely dead. And prior to the end of the trade deadline, we learned via Ross Atkins that Bo Bichette has no structural damage to his knee through an MRI after his injury on Monday night. He's considered day-to-day. This could result in an IL stint, but that has not been determined yet. He will not play in the next couple days. They'll reevaluate him. But as of right now, he's day-to-day. No torn ACL, no big major injury. But Bo Bichette did not play last night. I don't expect him to play tomorrow, and I don't expect him to play Thursday afternoon in the series finale against the Baltimore Orioles. So they found out about Bo Bichette's injury, and they did trade for a shortstop and Paul Dejong. He's more known for his defense than his bat. He's batting .233 on the season with 13 home runs and 32 RBIs. But he's won a Gold Glove before, and he's a good shortstop. It's tricky Because without Bo Bichette, this lineup offensively is really pedestrian and it's mediocre. Bo Bichette leads the American League in hits. Bo Bichette was the driving force of this team, and he made everybody better. Vladdy's having a bad season. You kind of forget about it a little because Bo Bichette was playing so well in front of him when it comes to just getting a hit. But if you lose Bo Bichette, say he's on the IL and he misses 2 weeks, Paul DeJong's playing shortstop every other day, where's he batting in the lineup? Where's he going to fit in? That means Brandon Belt has to play more and more, and he's actually had a very good second half of the season. But if Vladdy isn't contributing the way you expect him to, Whit Merrifield's been great, but how good can he be? Matt Chapman's is hit and miss when it comes to his bat. And then there's George Springer, who can't get a hit to save his life, who looks completely lost at the plate, has zero confidence, and he goes another 0 for 4 last night with a couple strikeouts. I think he's had one hit in his last 51 at-bats or something like that. He's in complete exile. He can't get a hit. There's no confidence there. So the Blue Jays are in a tough position because I don't feel they did enough, although they did do a lot. But their team is underperforming to such a level that the narrative is going to be that they didn't do enough at the trade deadline, and that's management. I don't think that's completely fair. George Springer is a multiple-time Gold Glove winner. He's a guy that was one of the best leadoff hitter in baseball. Now he's batting 4th or 5th in the lineup. That's on production. That's not on management. These players have lost the second fewest games, man games lost to injury, in Major League Baseball this year. Don't be in this predicament. Be better than this. You are 7-22 in the American League East. How about win a game against your own division? You've had a 5-starter rotation the whole damn year, other than Gausman having to miss a start because of lower back tightness and Malik Manoah not being able to pitch because he was so god-awful down in the complex. Other than that, this team has not had a damn hiccup all year. Whit Merrifield was a good trade last year for this team. Overall, George Springer was a good signing. Drafting Vladdy, Bo Bichette, two good draft picks. Trading for Matt Chapman at third base made some sense. He's one of the best defensive third basemen in baseball. Could they have used another bat? Yes. The one thing you can complain about this team is they hated Alex Anthopoulos because he traded away all their draft capital, all their prospects, in getting David Price, getting Troy Tulowitzki, Josh Donaldson to go for it. They hated him. When they got there, they were pissed because their farm systems were ruined. They did not have any groceries. They didn't have anything. They looked in the fridge and they had an old hunk of cheese that was way expired, that was molding. That's what they had. But now in 2023, after being at the helm for a long time, sure, Vladdy, Bo Bichette, 2 really good prospects, but we already knew that before. We haven't seen this management group draft any really good pieces in Toronto. Who? Manoah? That remains to be seen. Nate Pearson? He was supposed to be a starting pitcher. Now he's not a starting pitcher anymore. Now he's a guy from the bullpen who gets killed. You watch him pitch last night, give up that grand slam to Santander. Woof. He was good for a couple months. Now he's just a pitching machine. Who have they developed that has come up and have been of aid to this organization? Look at the Astros and what they have done even this year with their starting pitching. Yainier Diaz, who's now basically their everyday DH, who's also a catcher, who's come up, and he plays every damn day, and he was a AAA guy. How about the Baltimore Orioles? Half their fucking team they don't trade for players. They don't spend big money like the Blue Jays who spend over $200 million. The Orioles are bottom 5 in payroll, and they are dominating the majors. Kouser, Gunnar Henderson, Rushman, the top of their lineup are all guys who came through their system, were prospects, and developed. The Blue Jays haven't done it. The fault of this organization is not with their spending, not with trade deadline, in my opinion. It's the fact that they hated what Alex Anthopoulos did in Toronto and that they didn't have anything to show for it. And yet, in all the years that they've been in Toronto, they haven't produced anyone all that good. Who am I missing? Who has come through that really makes you think? They drafted Austin Martin. Remember him? Third baseman, got traded for Jose Barrios. We heard he was going to be a really good player. I don't know. He's not playing in Minnesota. They're 2 games above 500. That was a good trade. Barrios for Austin Martin. You do that every day of the week. Again, even with Barrios' season last year. Because you're trying to win. But looking for pieces to come up and help you, which Cincinnati can do at any turn, Baltimore can do at any turn, the Blue Jays haven't been able to. And you get one injury to a Bo Bichette. One injury. And now you look around and it's complete panic. This team isn't any good. And this isn't the Mets situation where you're spending big money and the team isn't that good, because look at their pitching. It's good pitch. They have a good staff. The back end of that bullpen is great. But a game like last night, it doesn't matter because the game's over in the 7th inning. And you throw at arms, Jordan Hicks' debut as a Blue Jay goes horrible. Gives up two runs. Genesis Cabrera was no good. Nate Pearson gives up a grand slam to Santander. And you end up losing 13-3 at home. But you're a game and a half up in the final wildcard position. Why should you? Why should you do more than you already done? You spent $200 million on your team. You need to spend more for a team that has gotten you to the last wildcard position. They're a game and a half up on the Red Sox as we stand today. A game and a half. And I'm going to go over this payroll again because I find it so interesting. So teams have gotten higher in payroll with the trade deadline. So for instance, the Mets are still first, but again, they trade away some pieces. But the Blue Jays are 9th in payroll. Red Sox are 13th. Just to put this into perspective, the Blue Jays spend $100 million more than the Cubs. Than the Red Sox. $100 million. 200 to 100. So it's a little different. Say, 9th, 13th, not that big of a difference. $100 million. A tad of a difference. Baltimore is spending $47 million on their payroll. They're 28th out of 30 teams. $47 million. That's with the addition of Jack Flaherty yesterday. And that $47 million payroll crushed the $200 million payroll team 13-3 last night, and they beat them 7 out of 8 times this year. Make that make sense. I don't think the Blue Jays are a bad team. I've said this before. I think they can win a World Series. Less likely now, because I think teams around them have gotten better, and teams around them were better already. But I don't think the anger should be directed, if you're a Blue Jays fan today and you're upset, it should not be directed at, we didn't do enough at the trade deadline, because that's just not true. 2 relievers and a position player is doing lots. In particular, when you don't have a good farm system. Remember that. You can only trade. You can't. Colin Cowherd got this wrong a few weeks ago, if you didn't see this on Twitter. He said teams should trade all their draft picks for Shohei Ohtani. You can't trade draft picks in baseball. You trade prospects. Can't trade draft picks, you trade prospects. So if you don't have any good prospects, if teams around baseball don't like your groceries and they don't like the hunk of cheese in your fridge, then they're not going to buy it. They're not going to trade you for it. This is going to be like Billy Madison when he's sitting there with a banana and he looks at the little kid and he says, I want the snack pack. Nobody's making that trade. I might. I like bananas. But nobody's trading a banana for a snack pack. Teams might be selling, but they'll go around and they'll ask somebody else. That's why the Blue Jays could only get a Paul DeJong. I thought Tim Anderson would have been a better piece. He stayed on the south side. He's still playing for the White Sox. Played last night. Blue Jays should have been in on Verlander. They didn't have as good a prospect as Drew Gilbert. Blue Jays should have been in on Scherzer. They didn't have it. They don't have the ability, the prospect pool, to be in on those conversations. That's the fault of this organization. That's where, if you're a fan, you're upset with them. Because they can't do a damn thing that George Springer can't get a hit. They sat him Monday night, you play him, and you hope to find something. Would Teoscar Hernandez's bat help this team in Seattle? Yes, certainly. Would have been another reunion just like Verlander yesterday. But does it make a whole lot of sense? Not really. Because where's he playing? Springer's playing right field. Because he's better defensively than Teoscar Hernandez, even if he can't get a hit. Kiermaier's playing center field and Varshaw's playing left. There's your outfield. Set. Your DH? Well, Belt's been pretty good. Hit another home run last night. Is Teoscar Hernandez playing DH over Brandon Belt? And that's no given to me. So if he's not, he can't play middle infield. Vladdy plays first base. If Belt's the DH, where's Hernandez playing? He's not going to be playing. So that's the thing. Sometimes it's just about finding. It would have made more sense to add another really good shortstop, another good middle infielder, so that Espinal doesn't have to have to play certain times. I don't know. The Blue Jays are a game and a half up on the Red Sox. They have 2 more against the Orioles this week. Then they have a weekend series at Fenway. And basically all the month of September, they play the American League East. That's your season. If you can't win against your own division, you're not going to make the playoffs. Point blank. 7-22 against the American League East. That's getting you nowhere. And it won't be because, we didn't make this trade. Sometimes you just got to find a way to win. The Baltimore Orioles added Jack Flaherty. That's the only trade they made at the deadline. Think about that. They have the best record in the American League. You think, well, they got the best record in the American League. They should be doing just more and more to guarantee that they win. They added one starting pitcher who's got a 4.30 ERA. They did less than the Blue Jays. 3 pieces to 1 piece. That would mean the Blue Jays did more. And yet the Orioles continue to beat them. And the Orioles pitching staff is flaky, to say the least. And they continue to beat the Blue Jays. I'll crush ownership, management, when it's fit. As you all know, I'll crush networks, anybody. They do something shitty that I think is crappy, that's just out of line, I'll do it. I don't believe that the trade deadline for the Toronto Blue Jays is a reason to hate Ross Atkins and Mark Shapiro. Because if you just listen to me for the last 20 minutes and you come away saying, no, I should hate them, you just choose to believe a fallacy. You choose to believe something that's wrong, which people do all the time, I guess. In the world in which we are with social media and cancel culture and everything else, people choose to believe incorrect facts all the time. I try to be the opposite of that. For the Blue Jays, I would look, you have 2 months. 2 months is a long time, and 2 months can change a perception of a player, of a season. Vladimir Guerrero Jr., your season has been mediocre, to say the least. If your last 2 months, you're one of the best players in baseball, people forget that you were that bad. People forget that you couldn't hit a home run before the All-Star break. Maybe go out and dominate. Find your game. And push for a wild card spot. Because you need it right now. Flaherty goes to the Orioles. You had Paul DeJong join the Blue Jays. Bo Bichette might hit the IL. We'll wait and see on that. Also in the American League East, the Rays got Aaron Savali a day ago, so that wasn't new news. But they played the Yankees twice this week. They've won the first 2 games. They've dominated them in the first 2 games. Really a confidence boost for that club. The Rays had, they ran into some trouble, but they're starting to find their game again. Zach Eflin's pitching. He got his 12th win of the year last night. Shane McClanahan versus Garrett Cole tonight in the Bronx. I think that game's on Sportsnet too, which that's a good game to watch, even if you're a Blue Jays fan. Because those are 2 of the best pitchers in all of baseball. I don't give a fuck who's pitching for the Blue Jays and the Orioles. That's who's pitching that game. Grayson Rodriguez, Kikuchi. Yeah, I'll skip that one. Might watch Rays and Yankees might be the feature presentation there. But the Rays are finding their game. They're right in there with the Orioles. They could still finish top spot in the American League East, certainly. The Yankees actually added a bullpen arm yesterday. They didn't sell Kinner Falfa, who is a middle infielder turned outfielder. But the Yankees didn't have anything to sell. They're not trading Garrett Cole. They're not trading Aaron Judge. They are in no man's land, but we know where they're going. They're sinking. They're done. The Yankees are done. It's kind of sad to see them right now. I mean, kind of sad. They're 3.5 games back, so technically they're still in it, but they're done. Get a shovel, bury them. That team they got no hope. They got no soul. It's something else. The New York Yankees. But I don't see this team rallying. Their bats stink. Their pitching's out of whack. Garrett Cole's fantastic. You love him, but he can only pitch every fifth day, and he's 9-2 on the season. And you got him pitching against Shane McClanahan tonight, who's 11-1. As I mentioned, kind of a good game tonight. Kind of a good pitching matchup. But they had a reliever, which the Yankees they lead the majors in adding a reliever at a trade deadline. They love to do that. It was kind of funny. I was watching the Mothership yesterday, their coverage, which it was pretty good for the most part. I mean, Timmy Kirchin, my guy, he's great on it. But listening to them try to talk up the Yankees, their bullpen's even deeper now, and they're going to have to pitch their way there. Yeah, no kidding. They have the lowest batting average in baseball. Of course, the pitching is going to have to get them there. Josh Donaldson can hit the backside of a barn door. I mean, Gleyber Torres has completely lost all confidence. This team stinks, but it's the Yankees, so you have to pretend to care because the Mets have waved the white flag, so you have to give some hope in New York, but they don't. They don't have any hope. The Red Sox made a minor move. They acquired Luis Arias, a middle infielder from the Milwaukee Brewers. And I saw online a lot of Red Sox fans were complaining that they didn't add. I don't know. What if they make the playoffs with this roster? Which they might. They're a game and a half back of the Blue Jays. They won in Seattle last night. What if they make the playoffs with this roster? I will be the first one to eat crow because I thought this team was going to stink. It was a complete rebuilding year for the Red Sox, but yet they're a game and a half back of the final wild card position. But the funny thing about fans, the Red Sox, if they make the playoffs, it'll be a fantastic story. But if they get Houston in a wild card series, they're not beating them. And you got to look at the teams ahead of you and say, even if we make a move, how would that be different? Let's try to make the playoffs with this team. Like, they didn't trade anybody. They didn't trade Alex Verdugo. Just doing that is basically signaling we're not selling, we're standing pat. They could have traded Verdugo to a contender. Traded him within division to the Blue Jays if they wanted it to. Traded him to a bunch of teams who acquired outfielders like the Diamondbacks, who got Tommy Pham yesterday. So there could have been opportunities, but sometimes it's just, I think the Red Sox looking at their situation saying, we're going to keep our pieces that we could have traded, like the Cubs, because we didn't expect to be in this situation, and see what happens. But they'll go into next season with the ability to spend money, with a team that's been through a hard-fought battle. Maybe they make the playoffs, maybe they don't. We'll have Chris Sale coming off our books. Trevor Story will be fully healthy next year. And also, by the way, it sounds like he's going to play this year. He's been practicing, so he's going to be able to play shortstop. So that's an addition. That's basically a trade deadline acquisition. Trevor Story, although he had a horrible first year in Boston, I remember him. I was at a game. Shohei Ohtani was pitching. He went 0 for 5 with 5 strikeouts and got booed. That was in early May. Maybe he can have a renaissance back half of the year, Trevor Story. I doubt it, but we'll see. Sometimes it's just standing pat and knowing where you are as an organization. And yes, it's Boston, and it's like New York, where its expectations are always to win. But you're not on a team that's going to win a World Series, but you can make the playoffs. Certainly. But I'm not trading away pieces. Prospects I think could help me that make no money, by the way. that could help me next year on building a really good team. In an American League East, that the only team I look at and go is set in stone is Baltimore because they're so young and their players are so cheap. The Yankees stink. They're going to stink again because their players are old. They need some time. The Rays, how long? The Rays continue to be good, so you can't never say they're not going to be good. But again, the Blue Jays, they're in shambles. Who knows what happens? I don't mind this. It's not always, okay, we got to press the floor down and we have to make a move. Do you really? Do you have to make a move? Again, I'm going to go back to the fridge analogy because it's top of mind today. Do you have to eat something if the only thing in your fridge is a molded piece of cheese? No, you starve, you fast, okay? Because you don't want to eat that molded piece of cheese that could get you sick. Oh, we got a hailstorm outside. We have to go to the grocery store. Oh, but the only car we have is a Ferrari. Do you have to go? No. Stay home till the rain subsides. There's another analogy to get away from the fridge. But you don't have to make a move necessarily. There's teams that had to make a move. Houston had to do that. Yes, because they're trying to win a World Series. Texas, I don't disagree with them that they had to do this because Houston is really damn good and they're in their same division and they don't want to play in a wild card game. Get that. Look at the Mets last year. They were great. Phillies caught them. They had to play in a wild card. The Atlanta Braves caught them. They had to play in a wild card game. Before you know it, they're fucking out. They had to do something. There's a move yesterday I did not expect. I didn't expect this team to do anything. The Philadelphia Phillies, who were in the World Series last year, who have won back-to-back games over the Marlins, had a slow start due to injuries but are now starting to find themselves. They acquired all-star pitcher Michael Lorenzen from Detroit. I like the trade. He's a good pitcher, was on the all-star team, add some more depth. Zach Wheeler, Aaron Nola, Lorenzen, Ranger Suarez, Taijuan Walker. You have options on the Philadelphia Phillies. Bryce Harper is playing a positioning. He's playing first base, so he's starting to find some health. This team is still really good. Yes, they're like 12 back of the Braves, but they're still a very good team. They get into the postseason, they would scare me. I like that move from the Phillies. Their ownership group continues to be aggressive. They want to win a World Series. They know they have a good team, and they keep providing good players to that organization. There were some minor things happened. Like I said, Diamondbacks acquired Tommy Pham. You had Scott Barlow was traded from Kansas City to Texas, I believe. The Marlins traded Gene Segura to Cleveland for first baseman Josh Bell. They also traded Garrett Cooper to the Padres. Now, the Braves did not get a starting pitcher. That was one thing that surprised me. But Spencer Strider is coming. They're going to have Kyle Wright coming back. Spencer Strider just recently came off the IL. Mike Soroka potentially could be like the big Canadian. If he could ever get healthy, he could be available. And also Max Fried, it sounds like he might pitch this weekend for the Braves. So they're banking on the players that they have in the system to come back healthy and be available for them. It's a risky proposition, but they also know what they have in-house. They know how good those pitchers can be when they're right. So I think the Braves may regret not doing something. They may regret not pulling off a move because I think there was something out there that could have happened. They're starting pitchers. Like the Dodgers getting Lance Lynn. I don't view that as a real big win. I don't think he's a great pitcher. Dylan Cease, he was not traded from the White Sox. They didn't want to move him. He would have been a really good fit for the Braves, but they didn't want to trade him, which is fine. Teoscar was not moved. I don't think they really needed him in Atlanta. They have enough depth. They have some really good hitters. That's not their problem. I think pitching is a bigger weakness for them than their position players. But we'll see with the Braves. Since the All-Star break, they haven't been as dominant. They're kind of like Atlanta, where they haven't. Sorry, they're kind of like Tampa Bay, where they haven't been as productive after such a dominant start. But they're still the pace car in the National League. They're still the team to watch out for. They're playing this afternoon against the Angels. You look out at their roster: Acuna, Albies, Austin Riley, Matt Olson, d'Arnaud, Ozuna, Rosario, Arcia, Marcel Harris III, and it's a really damn good 9 hitters. And they got good guys off the bench as well. So they certainly have options in Atlanta. They have guys that can produce, so we'll see what happens. But that's really the trade deadline. And now we have 2 months to watch baseball and see what happens. Before the year, I had Houston playing Atlanta in the World Series. And I think I had Atlanta beating Houston. I'm going to stick with that. The more I watch the Phillies, the more I believe that they're going to have to go through a wild card. That's the only thing with them. The more I watch the Phillies, the more I think they can get back to the World Series. They currently sit in the second wild card position in the National League, half game back of San Francisco. But you got Milwaukee, 58-50, Marlins, 57-51, Arizona, 57-51, then you have the Cubs, 54-53. And the Padres are 5 back as well. They didn't give up. They got Rich Hill, as you talked about yesterday. They got Garrett Cooper. So they're trying to add to this team. They're trying to get better. They didn't trade Josh Hader. They didn't trade any of the big players that potentially could have been moved. But there'll be some fun races. National League Central, you have a 3-team race between the Brewers, the Cubs, and the Reds. In the American League East, there will likely be 3 teams that makes the playoffs. The division winner, the Rays, and then potentially the Blue Jays or the Red Sox getting the final wildcard spot potentially. You got a race in the American League West between Texas and Houston to win that division. But then you also have the Angels. Can they get to the postseason after getting Randal Grichuk and CJ Cron and Lucas Giolito and adding pieces to try to help Ohtani finally make the postseason? Will that work out? And then actually, you got Braves and Phillies. Can the Marlins make the playoffs in that division after such a hot start? The Giants, with their no superstar team, will they make the postseason playing in that tough division with the Diamondbacks and with the Dodgers down the stretch? Dodgers get Lance Lynn, but they have one of their worst pitching staffs ever. How good are they going to be in the postseason? And are they just trying to compete this year and also hoping to land Ohtani in the offseason and then gear up for a World Series? So there's a lot to be decided. A strong couple weeks for baseball, I would argue. The interest goes up. You get some attention. And a one-day trade deadline period is smart. So, good for baseball. Where do we go now? Baseball, always interesting. We got games going on this afternoon. Do have some news on the NHL front, actually, right now. Troy Terry was scheduled to go to arbitration with the Anaheim Ducks. He's one of their best young players. He's been super productive But he doesn't have to go to arbitration because the Anaheim Ducks and Troy Terry have agreed to a 7-year extension times $7 million. So that's going to keep him in Anaheim for the long term here. And he's been on a bad team his entire career. And they get the deal done. If you look, last year he had 61 points in 70 games. He had 67 the year before. So he's a 60-point player. His goal total went down from 37 to 23. But he's been a stable force on that team. Mason McTavish has come through. You got fun players in Anaheim, young guys that he's kind of nurtured. He'll be 26 on September 10th. So he's in the middle of his career now. Trevor Zegras still there, Drysdale. So this team, we talked about it. They're not going to be good anytime soon in Anaheim. I like some of the stuff that they have, but there's a lot of stuff you look at that team and you go, oof, it needs a lot of work. It needs some upkeep, and it's going to take a minute. Is Troy Terry worth $7 million? No. And I don't want to give him, this is a scenario where he, to me, doesn't get a 7-year contract. He doesn't get $7 million. But Anaheim is such a bad team, and I think he's one of the more stable forces. And he is a good player, don't get me wrong. And he might be talked about more if he didn't play for Anaheim and he didn't play out west where nobody got to see him play. But this is Anaheim paying a tax to keep a player there. I think he wanted $8 million in arbitration. The team offered him $4.8 or $5 million, something like that. So they had a pretty big discrepancy in pay, and they settle on 7 years. And basically, what they told him is, we'll give you a big number, but you got to stay here for a long time. I don't think Troy Terry will be worth $7 million in a couple years. I don't know how productive he'll be down the road. So this is a situation for him where getting $49 million is a good decision. For Sebastian Aho, I have more faith in him being great at 31. I don't know about Troy Terry. I don't know about the players he's going to be playing with and how good they're going to be. It's young. Anaheim could be something that goes extremely well, where it's so painful at the beginning and you take your lumps and the team's awful and you get crushed. And after that, it's like losing 100 games in baseball. You break out of it and you win the Stanley Cup, like the Cubs, for instance, or the Astros, for instance. But I don't know. The nucleus of this team, Trevor Zegras is never going to be a superstar to me because he doesn't have the makeup. He doesn't have the overall game to do it. And I just don't have that faith in him. Who else? McTavish, I need to see more of him at the NHL level. I need to see more development. It's hard to do on a bad team when you don't have a whole lot of skill around you. The biggest thing for Anaheim to turn this around is they play a lot of selfish hockey. They play a lot of me or I'm him, to quote the millennial, hockey. That's not the way to win. That's not the way to... You need to have a team. There needs to be cohesion. There needs to be synergy. I don't see a lot of that with this club. Maybe it changes. They have a new coach. They're going through a different era, but that needs to happen. Troy Terry is a consistent point getter, and he's one of the... You could argue the best player on the Anaheim Ducks the last number of years. And he gets rewarded for being the best player on a bad team. honestly, this contract, I kind of equate it to getting a max contract in the NBA. In the NBA, if you're an all NBA player, you can get the max contract that Jaylen Brown just signed. For instance, Pascal Siakam told the Raptors, I don't want to be traded this offseason. He doesn't want to be traded this offseason because he knows he has a better chance of being all NBA if he's the best player on a mediocre to bad team. Then he can get a huge payday from the Raptors. Maybe he spends the rest of his career in Toronto, or maybe he plays a year and then demands a trade to the Clippers. Who knows? But Troy Terry, to me, has benefited from grinding out bad seasons on a really bad team and his numbers being a little more inflated than one might assume because he's on a bad team. He's going to get more opportunities than if he was playing with a bunch of skill guys. If he was on Colorado, he might be a third-line player. It might sound harsh, but I think that's just the nature of the beast here. A good player that gets rewarded for good production on a bad team. But if I'm the Anaheim Ducks, do I want him for 7 years at $7 million? I do not. But good for Troy Terry for getting the money. Never complain about somebody getting a good check. But would I give it to him? No. I would not. But good for him. The Boston Bruins agreed to a few contracts yesterday. Boston and Trent Frederick agreed on a 2-year, $4.6 million deal. He's kind of the backbone of that team. He's a guy that they need to be better in the bottom six of their lineup. He's kind of been a fighter to this point, a bit of an agitator. To me, Trent Frederick has more there. He has more offensive upside. He's not just a fighter, grit kind of guy. He has more tools in the toolbox. We just need to see them unleashed. And they get him for $2.3 million per season. It's not a bad deal because I think over 2 years he can bring you that amount of value. I don't know what I've mentioned. I don't think this is going to be a fun season for Bruins fans. I don't think this is going to be a fun season for Bruins players because the team is in a state of transition. They're not what they used to be. David Krejci is hasta la vista, baby. Patrice Bergeron is no longer a part of the team. So, in saying that, it's not perfect. But Trent Frederick is a good player to have if you're going to be a team that likely wasn't as good for the past 5 to 10 years. He's a guy that will keep the environment competitive. He's a guy that will not allow the team to be weak. And that is always advantageous to have on a roster. They went to arbitration with Jeremy Swayman. The arbiter ruled 1 year, $3.475 million for Jeremy Swayman. So he gets almost the same deal as Ilya Samsonov did in Toronto. And yeah, that makes sense to me. They're about the same goalie. Swayman makes about half the team starts every year. Now Boston will have Ullmark they'll have almost $8.5 million in their goaltending for next year, which they don't want to have because they don't have any money and they can't spend anything and they don't have any centers. I think it would have been smart to trade Jeremy Swayman to get something back, to be able to have some flexibility. But they have Swayman and they have Ullmark for 1 year. And also, why teams did not offer sheet Jeremy Swayman, beyond me. Because he might have a great year in Boston, and then he might be worth $6 million on the open market, which I don't think Boston would have matched at 4, because I don't think they like seeing $3.475 million come in. Sometimes it's just looking at a team's financials and realizing where they are. Boston was banking on Patrice Bergeron coming back. He did not. Now they're screwed. But Jeremy Swayman, Samsonov, Georgiev. Well, Georgiev's better than those two, but Vanacek, Varlamov. You go around the league, there's a bunch of guys that are the same goalie. If you want to say Samsonov's better than Swayman, okay. If you want to say Swayman's better than Samsonov, okay, I won't fight you on it. To me, they're all the same. Same goalie. It's just a bunch of guys who are around $3.5, $4 million. They're good, but they haven't proven that they can be a number one goalie consistently. That's where these guys are in their careers. They're at their salary range. They're trying to prove that they're more than what the perception of them is. Swayman's an interesting case study because you're only going to get a certain amount of starts in Boston. Samsonov has more of an opportunity in Toronto to earn big money if you play well. But teams that take chances on goalies all the time, I think Swayman would have been a better gamble than, say, Tristan Jarry in Pittsburgh. I don't think he's a great gamble. Giving him that many years, that amount of money, adding his salary to the old folks' home that they have in Pittsburgh with Crosby and Malkin and Letang. And okay. But again, teams around the league not giving him an offer sheet, not pressing Boston, not forcing Boston to make a mistake. It's just so weak. There's no spine in the NHL. You can't make anybody upset. Sean Payton the other day talked about Nate Hackett with the Jets. It was great. He shouldn't have walked it back. That's how you feel. That's how you feel. I don't care. I love anybody who's got something to say. It doesn't even have to be right. It could be wrong, and that's better because then it's funner to discuss. But no, you can't offer sheet because then Brian Burke gets mad that Dustin Penner, for Christ's sake, was offer sheeted a decade ago. Longer than a decade ago. Dustin Penner? Who gives a shit about Dustin Penner? Ugh. Also, Ryan McLeod was signed overnight by the Edmonton Oilers. They avoided arbitration. 2-year deal, $2.1 million per season for Ryan McLeod. He had 11 goals, 12 assists in 57 games last year. I like this for the team and the player. He hasn't proven that he's really a great NHLer yet. He's got some tools. He's got speed. He'll be on a team that is one of the best offensive teams in hockey because they have the best player in the league. So he will have opportunities to prove what he can do at the NHL level. It's a fair salary for what he's done so far. And it's only 2 years. So I don't mind that. Good for Edmonton for not screwing up a contract. And the Penguins and Drew O'Connor agreed to a 2-year contract, $1.85 million total. So $9.25 a year. He's 25 years old. Split his time between the AHL and the NHL last year. I think he's an NHL player, but again, he's kind of a third, fourth line guy. So you get him a cheap number. He gets to make an NHL salary. So it's a win-win. I believe there's still some arbitration hearings to come in the NHL. But after that, it gets a little quiet for a while. I guess arbitration might be done tomorrow. Is it August 4th? Let's see. So Ryan McLeod signed, Duhaime, Gustafson, Cates, Will Borgen, Tanner Janot. Yeah, no, I think pretty well everybody. They're scheduled through August 4th, but most of them are done. Most of them are done. So now it's just the Carlson possibilities, and you don't hear much else around the league. Not much on the Winnipeg situation with Hellebuck and Scheifele or any other trades. So it's kind of the rest of August. I expect to be relatively quiet in the National Hockey League. When we get closer to training camp, maybe there'll be some pressure points with certain options, such as Carlson. If he's still in San Jose, he might be a little upset that he remains with the team. Maybe there's another trade that we don't see coming that happens. But the way it looks right now, it should be a pretty quiet month now that the arbitration hearings are coming to an end here on August the 2nd. Justin Thomas. Justin Thomas has missed the cut at 3 of the 4 majors this year. He shot an 80 3 times at the majors this year. He has not won an event on tour. And he heads into this weekend needing at least an 8 tied for 18th or better to make it to the PGA playoffs beginning next weekend. Justin Thomas played last week at the 3M Open in Minnesota, and he missed the cut. He won the PGA Championship last year. He was featured prominently on Full Swing. And now here we stand with him sitting, trying to find his name here. Justin Thomas. He's in the 70s last week, but I don't think he is anymore. I can't even find his name. But he needs a tied for 18th or better, as I go through these lists, to make it to the PGA playoffs beginning next week. Top 70 golfers in the world make it to the playoff. He is currently on the outside looking in. He needs a really good finish. And it would be a guy who won a major last year to make the playoff. And possibly miss out on the Ryder Cup team would be unheard of. He's currently ranked 24th in the world golf rankings, but he is nowhere near the top of the board. This is without Koepka and Cam Smith and a bunch of guys that you expect to be there. But he needs a good weekend to get in. And I hope he does, because he's a good guy. It's a good story, but what a season it would be. The fact that he's playing at this event the weekend before the playoffs start tells you how it's gone for him. And he'll play tomorrow. Who's in his pairing? He is playing with... No, I don't see his name here. I just don't want to find his name today. That's my cross to bear today. But here we are. Justin Thomas is playing with Matt Wallace and Robert Strepp tomorrow. Not exactly a feature group. But needs at least a solo 18th or better to make the playoff. Top 70 players, then it goes to top 50. And then it's the top 25 in the world. They play in Memphis next weekend. It's called the FedEx St. Jude Championship. Then they go to Olympia, the North Course in Illinois for the BMW. And the Tour Championship is at East Lake in Atlanta, Georgia, the last weekend in August. See how it goes for JT. It's been a struggle all year long. He's battled through it. He's talked about it, but he says he's tweeted he wants to have the best finish to a season that anybody can remember. Have to battle to get into the playoff and then go win the whole thing. He will start that climb tomorrow at the Wyndham Championship. Tomorrow's podcast is going to be a little bit different. I talked about how I'm going to be doing a bunch of NFL shows as we get closer to the NFL season. Tomorrow night is the beginning of the NFL preseason. Jets, Browns, tomorrow Hall of Fame game. Zach Thomas, DeMarcus Ware, Darrelle Revis. A very solid Hall of Fame class. That game will be going down in Canton, Ohio. Kellen Mond is getting the start for the Cleveland Browns. Zach Wilson will be getting the start for the New York Jets. Might talk about the game briefly, but tomorrow's podcast, I will begin my preview of divisions, and I'll be previewing the AFC South tomorrow. So I'll talk about the Titans, I'll talk about the Jags, the Colts, go through the entire division, talk about what happened in the offseason, strengths and weaknesses for every team, and the team's outlook going into the season. So prior to the season starting, I will do a preview on every division. I'll be doing a show on the NFL's top stories. I'll be doing my NFL QB rankings podcast. I'll be doing a college football preview. Those are all forthcoming in the month of August. So lots of fun football content coming your way. On the pod, I'll also touch on anything that happens in baseball tonight. How Justin Thomas is looking at the start of the Wyndham. We'll be back to a normal podcast on Friday, previewing UFC Nashville and the rest of the weekend in sports. But that's coming up tomorrow. AFC South preview. We'll be doing 1 to 2 previews a week. Obviously starting tomorrow. And I think I'll do 2 weeks starting next week, mixing in content with the rest of that. But yeah, those are fun. They're fun for me to do a deep dive and just to get up to date on everything that's transpired over the course of the offseason, where players are, things of that nature. So stay tuned for that. That'll be on your feeds tomorrow. So that's coming up tomorrow. Also, Kelvin Gastlum is out of his fight versus Shavkat Rakhmonov on September 16th at it's a special Mexican Heritage Night. So that was the co-main event. Gastelum was moving down to 170 pounds. He's now out. Rakhmonov wants to fight him in Abu Dhabi. That card is already loaded, but that would be another huge fight added to it. We'll see. It was a video of him in sparring. He took an elbow to the head, so we'll see what happens there. But that fight is off as of right now. Also, Kamaru Usman, the former 170-pound king, has called out Stephen Wonderboy Thompson, saying he'd like to fight him. Which I didn't think Kamaru Usman would want to do that, but apparently he's interested in that fight. We'll see if the UFC is. They still got to pay Wonderboy, which no news on that yet. So that's all coming up. Also got Jake Paul and Nate Diaz this weekend, so another interesting weekend in the fight game. So we'll talk about that Friday. Tomorrow, AFC South preview, locked and loaded. And AFC South is normally the division that people say that lags, not a whole lot of interesting things. I enjoyed going through it. And I think it's more interesting this season than any year that I can remember. So I'll be back tomorrow with that. Enjoy the rest of your Wednesday. Happy Hump Day, folks. This is To The Point.